Okay, it's 6 o'clock, so I think we're going to get started. Good evening. This is Nicole Mace, Executive Director of the Vermont School Boards Association, and thank you for joining us for our School Board U Online free monthly webinar series. Tonight's topic is planning a board retreat. We have a pretty small group here tonight. And not a lot of presentation material, really hoping to be able to use this time to answer questions and talk through with folks what you're thinking about in terms of how to really make the best use of time with your board at a retreat in the next few months. So before we get underway, I want to make sure you know who's here. So I've introduced myself. Carrie, do you want to say hi to people?
Hello, everyone. This is Carrie Lamb.
Carrie's our Director of Operations, and she's making sure the technology runs well. If you do have any technical difficulties, the number to call is up there on the screen, and Carrie will sort it out for you. Carrie will also be taking charge of our questions box. You're always welcome to ask questions and offer your comments throughout the presentation. You don't need to wait until the end. Carrie will interrupt me when it seems like the right time to share your thoughts and questions. The question box is on the lower right hand of your screen. At the end of the webinar, you should receive a link to an evaluation. Please take a couple minutes to complete those. It really does help us make sure we're covering the right content in the right way. Tomorrow or Monday, you'll receive an email follow-up to this presentation that will provide you with the slides that we use, any other resources that we discussed tonight. And sometimes we receive questions that we need to think through and get back to you. So in the event any of those questions come up, you'll get that information in that email as well. Finally, we archive all of our webinars on the VSBA YouTube channel and on the VSBA website. So if some of your board members or administrators did not register, you can always direct them to those web resources to watch the video themselves. Okay, so tonight we're going to be covering some basic questions about why have a board retreat, talk about some things you can do in advance of the retreat to really set yourselves up for success. I'll talk a little bit about one of my favorite activities or outcomes for a board retreat, and that is setting and developing a system for monitoring strategic goals. And then we'll follow up with some next steps and questions with you all in terms of what you're looking for your retreat. So without further ado, here is a definition of a retreat. We're really looking for, it's really a time for a group to sort of take a step back from the day-to-day activities and really reflect, discuss, and provide, come together around a plan for moving forward. But it's really a way to set some time aside from the day-to-day operations to focus on what it is you're hoping to accomplish as a district and what you have accomplished.
Nicole, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am. Sure.
What is the downside of a board not holding a retreat?
So why don't we talk about why you should have a retreat, and then we can talk about the downsides. How's that sound? So here's some reasons that we think are good for having a retreat. The first is to really take stock and celebrate what you've accomplished over the past year. Oftentimes, board members come to meetings month over month, and they're consumed with the business of the organization, and it's hard to sometimes put your finger on what exactly is it that we've done to move this organization forward in the direction that we want it to move forward. So a retreat can be a really great time to sort of reflect on what's been accomplished over the past year. It's a really great way to strengthen relationships. So again, many board members don't know each other very well. They may be from the same community, but not necessarily within the same social group. And meetings don't necessarily lend themselves to the type of relationship building that can be really important to function as a team. And so the retreat can again create that space and time to focus on getting to know one another within the board and also with the administration. So that's another purpose of a retreat. A third could be to orient newer board members. It's not uncommon for a board to see 2 to 3 new folks join on an annual basis, and a retreat can be a really nice way to, again, while discussing what's been accomplished, you can sort of recommit to the goals that you've set or create new goals together. But it's a really important way to bring new members on board and feel a sense of ownership of, what the goals are for the coming year. Speaking of goals, it's a really great way to, again, set aside some time from the business to what is it we hope to accomplish for the coming year, setting some goals for the board itself, and setting some goals for the district. And this is going to be done in partnership with your administration because they likely have goals that they've committed to with the state or other grants, and there's certainly a lot of requirements that limit the direction you can sometimes go, but and that's why it's really important that both the board and the administration together are articulating, given what we have underway and where we want to go, what are we going to prioritize for the coming year. A retreat can also be a good opportunity to dig deeply into a single issue or area. So not too long ago, I was invited to work with a board who was really feeling like they needed to set a clearer course for their middle and high school. And so we spent some time at that retreat just focusing on, a sort of deep dive of the data related to that school, and they were able to generate an immediate action plan moving forward in terms of giving board direction and planning next steps.
Nicole, I have another question.
Sure.
Is a retreat considered an open meeting?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So a meeting is anytime you have a quorum of the board together discussing the business of the board. And certainly the business of the district is the business of the board. And so that doesn't mean that you have to have it in the location that it's where meetings are typically held. It's not uncommon for folks to have a retreat off-site at another location, as long as it's open and accessible to the public and it's been warned and minutes are taken, you will have satisfied the requirements of the open meeting law. It doesn't mean the public gets to participate in all the activities or the discussions, but they can come. You have to give them an opportunity to speak during like a public comment period, and they do have the right to observe the conversation. That's a great question. And finally, in terms of why have a board retreat, it can be a really nice opportunity to re-energize the board around the work of the organization, around a specific project or goal that was set that, maybe there was a lot of enthusiasm for something a few years ago. There's still some enthusiasm out there, but we really need to spend some time to recommit to whatever it is. I'll give you an example. In 2013, the School Boards Association and the Superintendents Association came together and launched a shared agenda for public education called the Agenda for World-Class Education. A lot of enthusiasm at the time. A lot happened in the immediate aftermath on the policy front. And then 3 or 4 years into it, we had leaders from both organizations say, you know, we really need to come back together and recommit to that agenda and identify next steps. So again, a retreat can be a really great way to do that outside of your regular monthly meetings. So what are the cons in terms of not having a retreat? I think not taking time to pause and reflect and talk about, so how did we do over the past year? What is it that we accomplished? And what is it that we want to accomplish in the coming year? You know, as I said, it becomes really difficult to you know, have a sense of where you are and where you're going. So oftentimes it's not unusual for a board to meet rather infrequently during the summer. It can be difficult to get a quorum in July in particular. And so next thing you know, you're off and running into the school year, and not soon after that, or not long after that, you're in budget season. And so to the extent the board hasn't taken time to really think about how the previous year went, set some direction for the administration, whether it be on issues like the budget, facilities planning, community engagement around a vision or a strategic plan, you can often find yourselves with the calendar going by and not making progress on some of the bigger picture issues confronting the district. So that's what I would offer as a downside for not taking that time. VSBA board has a retreat every year. It's built into our calendar. So that every June, rather than a regular board meeting, we have a daytime retreat. And as the administrator or the executive director, I find that extraordinarily important in terms of staff spending time focusing on what have we accomplished and where do we think we need to go in the coming year, and board going through that same conversation and then having that conversation together. When I was on the city council, same thing. We had an annual retreat in usually around June, and that became really, really critical in terms of giving guidance for the coming year. Any other questions, or should we keep going?
I don't see any right now.
All right. So here's a few sort of basic tips, I think, to planning an effective retreat. Definitely selecting a date and time well in advance can help assure good attendance. It's not a great retreat if you don't have most, if not all, board members there. Because it really isn't important. As I said, if you're setting direction for the coming year, it's really important that people share a sense of ownership of that direction. Making it part of your annual board calendar so that we just know every June we do this, or every August, can be, or even July, can be useful in terms of ensuring people just block off the time on their schedule, and then once the summer schedules roll out, people, you're not trying to compete with 10 different vacation schedules. Selecting a location offsite, we do recommend sort of changing things up. It can be nice to just have a different space. It doesn't need to be an exotic location, but it is nice to sort of be in a different space that's somewhat more relaxed and lends itself to more casual group conversation or small group conversation. It's always nice to eat together. So if you can share a meal, that sort of builds in that relationship building time. So, if you don't have time necessarily to do a icebreaker activity or some other, relationship building activity, sharing a meal can go a long way to building relationships. I always think it's really important to solicit input from other board members before the board chair and superintendent start to plan the agenda for the retreat. As a facilitator who works with boards, I'll often ask that we send out a survey to all board members, asking questions that would essentially allow us to say, board members in general are looking for this outcome at the retreat. And so I'm happy to share with you some of our sample questions that we use to try to get input from board members ahead of time. But again, in terms of a shared sense of ownership of the work, we think that's an important step. And then when you're thinking about the agenda, it's critical, I think, to have a balance. So you're not putting folks through 4 hours of presentation, that you're really balancing presentation with opportunities for board members to interact with one another and with administrators, depending on the topic. The agenda should really encourage open discussion, free thinking, allow people to explore areas that maybe they wouldn't feel comfortable doing, or there's really not time to do at a board meeting. It should commit to some extent to building that sense of team, and there's a lot of different ways you can do that. We'd be happy to talk with you about some activities that we use. And if it's in the summer and it's you're in a location where you can get outside, even setting aside, we're going to take a walk for 30 minutes after lunch together. Again, that can go a long way in terms of helping people get to know one another. Any questions about that?
We have no questions right now.
Okay. So should you use an outside facilitator? I think there's some benefits to doing so, but they're certainly not required. I've done it both ways. At the VSBA, we tend not to use an outside facilitator, but again, it's something we do regularly, so it's part of the culture of the organization. I think if it's the first time you've had a retreat and you don't have a lot of practice or experience or not quite sure what outcomes you're looking for, using an outside facilitator can be helpful. It can also be helpful if you're sort of navigating a pretty tricky topic where there's a lot of emotion or opinion about a specific issue. Having a neutral outsider who really doesn't have a vested interest in an outcome can be useful in helping the board have what can be a difficult conversation. A facilitator can also bring a fresh perspective, ask questions about, the structure of the agenda, and can really, I think, support potentially new creative processes for tackling problems or, areas that the board wants to work on, not necessarily problems. Can be somebody who's on the outside, willing to ask difficult questions and or willing to set the stage for the board to have a difficult conversation. I've been invited to come to board retreats or board meetings where there's concerns about board dynamics and individual behavior or group behavior, and having an outside facilitator set the stage for that conversation can be helpful. An outside facilitator can't solve those problems or address people's behavior for you, but can create a safe space to have that conversation. And the last piece is I think an important one. Having an outside facilitator does allow everybody to participate. So if the board chair is facilitating the retreat, it can sometimes be difficult, like it can be difficult at meetings, to participate fully in the discussion. And certainly you want your chair to be fully engaged in the discussion at a retreat. So those are just some things to think of. As I said, it's certainly not a requirement to do, particularly if you're sort of in the habit as an organization of taking time and to take stock of where you're at.
I have a couple of questions now, Nicole.
Okay. All right.
The first is, would you recommend an outside facilitator for newly merged districts or a board member?
So we actually offer, I believe it's useful to have an outside facilitator work with a newly merged board because, again, it's a very new process. And I firmly believe that it's important for newly merged boards to set aside some time early on in their existence to focus on the big picture, to build relationships, to set goals. And if you don't do that, then you run the risk of sort of jumping into decisions without having a clear sense of where we want to go and why. So, and again, I think having all board members be able to participate in that discussion can be really important in terms of the shared sense of ownership. I hope that answered the question.
One other question. Do we need to post an agenda for a retreat?
Yes, you do. It does not need to be a very detailed agenda. But yes, you do need to post an agenda because it is a meeting. Anything else?
That's all I have right now.
Okay. So I've talked a little bit about this in terms of one of the benefits of a retreat being a focus on building a strong team. I think there's, like I said, a lot of different ways, and it really depends on the board and where you're at in terms of the your growth as a group. But certainly if you're just coming together and you really don't know one another, I think it's important to really intentionally set aside time at the beginning of the retreat to get to know one another. And I have some fun activities that I like to do with new board members, really trying to get on the table for folks, you know, why are you on the board? But also sort of what skills do you think you bring as a board member? What experiences did you have in school? Did you like school? Was school okay? Did you hate school? And a number of different questions to really sort of tease out from folks where they're coming from when they come to as people, individuals serving on a board. And I think that really can help in terms of once you're back into the sort of daily grind, or not daily, monthly grind of your meetings, and you're hashing out a particular issue, it can be really useful to be able to say, oh, I think I might know where this person's coming from because I remember he or she had this experience in school, or he or she has this particular skill set that they're really interested in contributing to the district. So I think setting aside time early on in a board's life cycle, so to speak, to get to know one another and understand each other's what you bring to the table can help down the road, and when things start to get more when you start really getting into decision making for the district. And it can also be fun, which is, you know, it's important because being a school board member is not always fun. To the extent you can enjoy one another's company, I think that's a good thing, and that can carry you through the more challenging times. Any questions?
None right now.
Okay. So I think one of the most important purposes of a retreat is to set annual goals. And, you know, some districts have a strategic plan that they use, that's a, you know, a 3 to 5 year plan that they use to sort of orient the work of the district. Many schools and districts have to develop a continuous improvement plan, but that is typically owned by administrators. And so while there are goals for the district embodied in the continuous improvement plans, they may or may not have a direct connection to the board's vision statement or overarching direction that it has set for the district. So whether you're using a strategic plan, whether the district is really focused on a continuous improvement type of a framework, or whether you're just focused on a vision statement and strategic goals that are aligned with that vision statement, if you haven't set a goal for yourselves for the coming year, both as a board, but also as a district, so that your administrators have clear direction. It's really difficult to know where you're going to end up 12 months from now. So the process that we like to recommend in terms of setting annual goals is to, number one, reflect back on, what have we accomplished over the past year. If you didn't have goals last year, that's okay. I'm sure a lot of work was accomplished. And so you can talk about, ask your administrators what they're proud of and what they want to celebrate and reflect back to the board. And the board members themselves can reflect on progress. Usually one is we passed a budget. That's usually a concrete a goal that folks can celebrate, and it is a big one. But goals beyond just the budget, I think, can be really, really important. So once you sort of talk about and assess what we achieved over the last year, you can start to identify, well, it's rare that you see an event to conclusion. We're sort of always in progress. So if we want to continue to make progress on this specific goal, where do we need to continue our focus? It's critical that that be a shared conversation between the board and the administration. The board sets the vision, sets the direction, sets the policy, but it's your administrators that have to carry it out, and also have are balancing a lot of the other sort of must-dos of the operation. And so it's important that they make sure the board is well aware of, before you want us to take on this new initiative or pursue this new thing, you need to understand all this other work we have in progress that we're either required to do or we've already committed to do. So it really needs to be a shared conversation. So once sort of the boards put their priorities on the table, the administration has done that, then you need to spend some time prioritizing and really start to focus on what are the 3 to 5 measurable goals that we can set for ourselves, so that next year when we come back together, we can have a really focused conversation about how we did. Be really specific in terms of who's responsible for what piece. What does the board need to do in order to move this work forward? Is it a resource allocation issue? Is it a policy issue? Is it a conversation that needs to happen with the community in order to get better input and direction, versus the administration's role? And how are we going to know if we've attained these goals? Again, was worked with a board not too long ago where they said, well, we did have a retreat 8 months or so ago, and we did set some goals. And I said, well, what were the goals? And they were very, very broad, well, college and career ready, safe and positive culture in our schools. Those are important, I think, strategic priorities or strategic objectives and pieces you might pull out of a vision statement. But they're not really actionable goals that you can set for a system. And so that then became the conversation. It's like, okay, so how do you dial that down to something that's meaningful that can serve to orient the work for the coming year? Is there any questions about that? And then I'm going to show you a couple tools that I found useful, again, when I was on the city council, in terms of bringing goals into like actionable reality. But I'll pause and see if there are any questions before I do that.
We have no questions right now.
Okay. Oop. So I have taken the liberty of borrowing the vision statement from the Montpelier-Roxbury School District, which is at the top of this chart. And this is a chart that I developed with the city manager in Winooski, where I served on the city council for 4 years. And so the city manager is the superintendent equivalent there. And so I converted some of the municipal sounding goal areas into goal areas that were aligned with the Montpelier-Roxbury School District's vision statement. And this was really a critical, this is the tool that we used at our retreat every year. So we had 4 sort of policy goal areas within our strategic vision statement. And every year we would bring those out and identify what it was we wanted to prioritize as a goal for the coming year. And then we also needed to recognize the work that was already underway. So that's sort of the will do category. And then we had, you know, here's what the board needs to do in order to make this, to achieve this goal. And here are the strategies that the administration is recommending to make progress on that goal. And here's the individual staff who's responsible for that. And so this tool, which I can email you in Excel form along with the other materials, became a really, really important way for us to organize our thinking at the retreat. Now, it did not happen without a tremendous amount of work from the city manager and her leadership team. So they spent a lot of time in advance of the retreat having their own leadership retreat, talking about these are the big picture goals that we have for this this organization. Here's what we already have underway. Here's where we think we, you know, where we need to turn our attention to next, and here's what we think the strategy should be. And then, so they had done some work ahead of time. Individual counselors or elected officials had done their own thinking ahead of time, but we all have this relative framework that we were working in, and it made the retreat very productive in terms of, you know, the council would push back, like, we don't really think that's the priority for this year, or we're not comfortable with that recommended strategy. Can you give us more information? Or we would like you to this year prioritize this strategy over that strategy in terms of achieving the goal. So it became a really fruitful and focused conversation. And at the end of it, we had this chart that said, this is our work for the coming year. And we adopted it at the meeting after the retreat, once we had some time to review sort of the draft that came out of it. And then we set and agreed to a reporting calendar that ensured that at least once a month, the board received a report on one of the 4 goal areas that we had identified. And here I've added operational efficiencies because I think at least, you can add whatever fourth category you want, but at least once a month, we received a detailed report in our packets from the city manager on one specific area in terms of, here's what we said we wanted to accomplish, here's the progress we're making, maybe we're on schedule, maybe we're not, and here's why. And it became a really important mechanism for the board to check back in over those goals throughout the course of the year, because it's not particularly useful to anybody if you set some goals in June and you don't come back and talk about them until the following June. That does not serve to orient the work of the organization as much as if the expectation is we're going to receive a report on this one area a month. In addition, our agendas were structured so that when we had an action item that was aligned with one of our strategic vision goal areas, that was noted on the agenda. Again, when you're sort of in the flow of a meeting, and sort of it's easy to get caught up in, we have to take this action, we have to conduct this business. It's really important. Oftentimes the business is serving to move you towards the goals that you've set, but it's not obvious. And so we really asked that the chair and the administrators focus in their agendas, calling out when it was we were taking action or discussing something that was relevant to one of our strategic goals. And again, that serves as a very important reminder of why we're coming to these meetings and focusing on this work in particular. So those are some tools, again, I will share with you that I found to be beyond, sticky notes at a retreat and coming back with a report that may sit on the shelf or may not. Really using the retreat event itself as a way to encourage administrators to come together and bring their best thinking to, how did we do over the past year? Where do we want to go moving forward? And how does that connect to the work of the board? And then the board having that time together, and then culminating in some real, concrete tools to hold one another accountable. That makes a retreat an extraordinarily powerful event for an organization, and it makes it not just a one-time event, but something that both kicks off a year and closes it off, but the work continues throughout the year. So that is enough out of me. We did take questions throughout the presentation, but if you have additional questions, would love to hear them. And then I just posed some questions here. If anybody wanted to, engage in a discussion at this point in terms of sharing your experience with the retreat, how you've defined success, how you use it to move the work of the board forward, we'd love to hear from you.
Nicole, I have a question.
Okay.
Actually, someone called this question in the other day as well. Different person. Our meetings are filmed. Does the retreat have to be filmed or recorded?
I do not believe the retreat has to be filmed or recorded, unless you have a policy that you've adopted that says all of your board meetings will be recorded. There's no legal requirement to have your meetings recorded.
That is the only question I have so far.
That's the only question. Does anybody have any success stories they want to share with the group? Or tips that I haven't shared or covered?
I have nothing so far.
Nothing so far. Okay. Well, as I said, we do provide supports for board retreats, either directly facilitating or also happy to talk with a board chair or board member or superintendent about thoughts you have about how to structure a retreat to make it a really powerful experience for the board and the organization. So we can either be on the ground working with you. These are our staffs. Susan and I tend to be most involved in the retreat business, but I'm sure Sue would be glad to pitch in if our schedules got crazy. We also have a few other folks that we work with that facilitate retreats for boards. So if you were looking for someone other than VSBA staff, we could connect you with that kind of a resource as well. Just want to encourage you all to really think about how you could best leverage time as a board to really commit to the direction of the organization and provide guidance for yourselves and the administration about what you'd like to achieve over the coming year, given all the other constraints and requirements you may be facing. And also, you know, commit to building that strong team, because those relationships can really serve the board and the organization very well if you're operating from a strong foundation. So if there are no other questions or comments, Carrie?
We're clear right now.
We are clear. We will close the webinar a little early and wish you all a lovely rest of your evening. And please feel free to get in touch if you have any questions about this or any other topic where we are here to help.
Good night, everyone.
Okay, good night.